Welcome to another episode of Celebrating Small Family Businesses. I'm John, this is Connie, and today we are celebrating Philip and Beth, owners of Spotz Gelato in Kentucky. So we're outside of Florida. Hi, Philip. Hi, Beth. How are you today?
Hey there.
I'm great.
Doing good.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. So how did you guys get to be in the gelato business?
Well, it was a roundabout way. Neither one of us ever dreamed that we would be in the food business. We didn't, that was not our background at all.
What was your
But,
background?
well, both of us worked in corporate. I was in the legal field and
I worked in the medical field, worked on medical equipment for 30 years. I was kind of set in my ways and we had no idea. It just kind of worked out. Really, it just
well,
happened.
well, we had a hobby farm here in Kentucky, and neither of us had ever farmed before, but it was a farm that had a great old house that was falling in, and we bought the house at auction, and it came with a farm. So we quickly learned how to do some farming things, and we did lots of different things with the farm. At one point, we were doing we call it a community supported agriculture, or CSA, where we were feeding. People would buy shares in the garden for the whole year. They'd pay the fee up front, and then we would deliver a box to them of items that were grown on the farm each week. And so at the time we were doing a CSA, and we raised the majority of the things, but we couldn't raise everything that would go in these boxes each week. So we worked with other farmers in the area to add things to these boxes. So we already had this network of farmers that were raising lots of great things, that we didn't raise. And about the same time, we were traveling during the winter, and we would go to this ice cream shop after dinner every night. And it was a walk from our hotel, and it was great. And I said to the guy that owned it, so why, half jokingly, why is this so great? Is it because we're on vacation? He said, well, it's not ice cream, it's gelato. And that's the first that I had heard of gelato. And his explanation was that it was made daily from local ingredients. And I thought, well, we have local ingredients at home and access to these great farmers, and I'm just going to go home and try and make this, which is what I did. I tried to make it in my home kitchen. People kept saying you should sell it. And Philip thought it sounded like a good idea to build a food truck
Yeah.
out of a vintage trailer. And so he built a trailer. We learned to make gelato more commercially in larger batches, and we ran this food truck on the weekends, and it was such a hit, more than we ever thought it would be. So then the next year we added a second truck and built a commercial kitchen on the farm. And so we've kind of turned into raising hay on the farm and making gelato. There's not much other farming that goes on anymore. So that is our roundabout story, how we ended up
Wow.
doing this. Yeah.
So when you did that first food truck, were you both still working corporate?
Yes. And we
Okay.
were for quite some time.
Our plan was to continue working and doing this on the weekends just for just extra money, and we enjoyed it. We worked together,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it. And it was busy, but I think once we decided to do a second truck, we knew that we were going to have to do something else. So
The craziest thing of this whole story is that we bought a commercial gelato machine, and the way the food guidelines were at that time, we had to make the gelato on that first food truck. And so we would go to events, and we would be making gelato, and we'd be selling it out the window, and it was selling so fast that we couldn't keep up with
yeah,
what
it's
it was crazy.
didn't have time to make it because you were so busy scooping it.
Yeah.
So we learned really quick. You learn from your mistakes, and we learned that there's easier ways to do that.
Yeah. So then we built a commercial kitchen just for gelato on the farm, and that was one of our best decisions.
Yeah,
It's allowed us to grow.
It really has.
Sure. Sure. But it's a big commitment in that, when you're one truck and you're kind of trying it out, to build a commercial kitchen seems like a leap.
Well, yeah,
It
and the
was.
machine.
Yeah,
Just
it's
at the
expensive.
beginning.
It's expensive.
The original machine that we used at the time was $10,000.
So it's
And,
big
we
chunk.
hadn't sold gelato. We hadn't sold the first cup of gelato to anyone. And we bought this machine, and he built the truck, and, it was kind of a wing and a prayer sort of thing. And it
was a
worked
big,
out.
and we learned a lot.
Yeah.
We learned a lot real quick.
So,
And plus we enjoyed the construction part of the kitchen. We did pretty much everything. So that part was, I enjoyed that.
yeah. Yeah.
What would be one of the biggest things you learned when you first started and got that first machine?
Well, the way the laws are on producing in Kentucky, you had to, I guess, your milk and your cream had to be commercially,
So
I'm trying
you
to-
couldn't just buy a gallon of milk and a gallon of cream and put them together, because then you are running a dairy operation. But what you could do is you could buy pre-mixed milk and cream in the ratios that you wanted to use it, and then you're running a ice cream business. So, yeah. So that is how we had to do it. And now still the milkman delivers every week, and it's a specialized blend of milk and cream and sugar, and that's what we use.
Wow.
So
So it's
that was-
an ingredient. The way the ingredients are sourced and combined is all regulated for the end product.
if you have to sell it commercially, yes, it's in Kentucky especially. Other states are different, I think.
And I
Oh.
think too, that was one of many things that we learned, because like I said, we hadn't been in the food business, so each day we had a new education about something, and still to this
Yeah.
day, we're still learning, as we eventually moved out of just having food trucks and into brick and mortar stores, then that's a whole nother group of regulations, and things that you have to learn, and all of your inspections and all of your construction and that sort of thing. So, it
Deal-
keeps you on your toes.
You're with different counties, so they're maybe follow the law a little different. So certain places are more strict on your plumbing or other things that you're doing in your stores. So it varies, and you do learn, and you just know it's not going to be. We know we don't know everything.
So how long ago did all this start?
We started about 11 years ago,
Okay.
and just did food trucks and mobile events until 2019. And in 2019, that's when we opened our first stores. And and we liked having the winters off. That was part of the reason that this seasonal kind of business worked great for us. We could still travel and do what we wanted to do in the winters, and work really hard in the spring and summer. So we kind of were resistant to the idea of opening brick and mortar stores, because we didn't want to be tied down in the winter. But the first location kind of fell in our lap. It was in a small little town that we liked.
I mean, close.
And
close
we
to us.
loved the building, and the price was right, and we liked the people that owned the building who wanted us to come. And so we said yes. And that was the first one. But at the same time, another one fell in our lap.
Oh,
And
my.
that's how we came to open two.
Two within a few weeks of each
Yeah,
other.
at about the same
I
time.
heard you say stores, and I was poised to ask that question because that seems like, kind of fast.
It wasn't planned that way, but it worked out.
Well, and I think that's true with a lot of things that have happened with us. We have seen, we've had opportunities present themselves that maybe were not really what we originally thought we would do. But we've been open to ideas as they've come along and made it work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Just kind of roll with it. So you've got to be flexible for sure.
You
Yeah.
bet.
So how was it? Okay, so you both had your own careers,
Uh-huh.
and you didn't work together, and now all of a sudden you're together.
Uh-huh.
How
we
did
get
that
that.
work out?
We
We
get
get
asked that a
asked-
lot.
Yeah. So we recently celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary.
Congrats.
That alone is, there's some secrets to pulling that off. But when you add that we work together, it makes it even more unusual, I think. But I think the secret to our success working together is we both do different things.
We each have a strength, and we're usually in the same place or the same area, but
We're not working together.
I'm in a different area. I'm in the kitchen or another warehouse or something. And so we don't really we see each other for dinner sometimes, and that's just like we would normally. So
And I think too, I know that he knows his areas much better than I do. He pretty much manages the kitchen, he manages all of the deliveries, all of the warehousing, ordering, all of that. He's managing that aspect of the business. Where I do more hiring of the staff, more training of the staff, more managing of the staff, office functions, and marketing for the business. And so I know that he knows his areas a whole lot better than I do. So
it really works out.
he kind
right.
of takes the lead in those things. And I think he also trusts me on the parts that I do. If there's something that we really feel strongly about that the other is doing, then we have a discussion about it. But most of the time, that doesn't happen very often.
No, we don't.
I figure we've done something right with this combination to have made it work this long.
We're still learning, so,
Yeah.
and every day's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, we call it we call it the surprise of the day.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That's a good thing to call it.
So we get out of the bed in the morning and we have a plan, this
Oh yeah.
is what's going
This
to
is what we're
happen.
going to do today.
And it never ends up that way.
How did I end up here? Right.
Exactly.
But that's the way it is. I mean, it happens.
That's entrepreneurship, right? That's entrepreneurship 101.
Yes.
Be flexible. Yeah.
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 Flexible, adaptable, resourceful, and resilient. That's my motto.
Right.
Go far. FARR.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that works for sure.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned staffing. Is that something that you brought from your corporate experience, hiring and managing?
No. Well, a little bit. I did hire and manage in my corporate job a little bit, but most of our staff are high school and college age kids. And so that presents a whole nother set of challenges. Our staff are great, and we are hiring, for the most part, the best of the best. I think probably the management of our staff, we learned more from our own grown children. Wouldn't
Yeah.
you say?
Yeah. We had kids, and
How
we know
so?
how kids are, and
Yeah.
kind of knew what to expect. And, sometimes they try to treat us like, I guess they would talk to their parents, and we already know
We know those tricks
Yeah.
sometimes,
Honestly, that's probably the hardest part of the job is,
It is.
I think the labor,
Yeah.
managing the labor. It's difficult. Everything else is almost easy compared to that.
And, just having gelato shops, the ice cream business, most of your staff is going to be high school, teenage kids. And even the great ones that stay with us, they eventually age out because they're going to college or they're going on to their regular careers. So you've got a very short window of keeping those same kids, And so it's a balance of the ones that you hire this year are the ones that you're hoping that you can keep a couple years, and the ones that are aging out this year, they're going to be a good influence on the new ones that are coming in. It's difficult because you don't want all young ones,
Right.
and you don't want all ones that are leaving to go to college in August either. You've got to have a blend of both so that you can make it through your season with a somewhat experienced stacking base.
Yes.
And in the summer, we may have up to 70. So there's a lot. Yeah.
It's part-time. They're all part-time.
They're all part-time. And
Okay.
like I said, most of them are involved in lots of extracurricular activities. They're athletes. They're, so even during the year, someone may be involved in a sport real heavily during the spring. So they're not working much in the spring, but then they may work a whole lot more in the summer and in the fall when they don't have things going on. So it's a juggling act to make sure you have the right mix and the right number of folks in your stores,
Wow.
What a scheduling nightmare.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you found a particular like piece of software or tool that really helps make that easier, or did you just have to figure it out?
Well, we have a secret weapon for our scheduling.
Can we talk about it?
About
How secret?
let's see. When we have a woman that works with us who owns her own business. She is a virtual assistant. She actually lives in Kansas, and she's been with us for 6 years, since right before we started opening stores. And she handles 100% of the scheduling for our staff members. And she does it from Kansas, does it completely remotely. And she, as you can imagine, she and I are in touch multiple times a day.
And she was a teacher, so
yes.
she knows
Oh,
how to
good.
deal with these kids.
Yeah. And she was a middle school teacher who she stopped teaching school because she started her own family. And she has a bunch of kids, and this keeps her able to manage her household and spend time with her kids. And, we're one of her clients. We are not her only one, but we keep her hopping for sure.
It's been great.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it without it.
Wow.
But we are very upfront with our staff in that we expect them to be mature enough to be in charge of their own schedules. They enter their availability, the times that they're available to work and the times that they are not available to work. And based on that is how we do the schedule. So
It works really good as long as the kids fill out their forms correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And if something comes up and they're not able to work, we also make it clear to them if they can't work for whatever reason, they are responsible for finding coverage for that shift. And we may have to remind them over and over and over again, but we make them do it. And then pretty soon they realize this would have been so much easier had I just done my availability correctly, and it's part of,
Oh my.
we're not just teaching
So
them how to
they-
work with us, but
Mhm.
we're teaching a lot of them how to have a job because we may be the first time they've ever had a job.
Most of them, it's their first job.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I was sensing, is that you're doing a lot of development of life skills.
Right. It's great. Our scheduling, she's a magician,
Yeah.
for sure.
Sounds like it.
And you keep her very happy.
Yes. Yes.
It works for her. It really does.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Fabulous.
What's something that you know now that you wish you'd known when you started?
Oh gosh. How hard it would be and how much time it actually takes. And what I mean, I guess, is you think that part of the joy of having your own business is to be able to set your own schedule, right? Which we can, but that doesn't mean that you're ever 100% off duty, you know?
I mean, we try not to do much while our stores are open, but sometimes, like we go to a movie or just out to dinner, we still have to work and still take care of problems and things like that. So you're kind of on call pretty much all the time.
And we still have that same model where we're closed in the winter because the sales are not as great in the winter. So we close about Halloween and then we reopen around St. Patrick's Day. So that's cool. But I haven't had a day off since March 1st.
Yeah, I mean, we work full time, but with all of our times in just a few months.
Yeah.
Which is fun. It's not for everybody because there is some long days.
Yeah, it's longer than like I'm thinking of some of the the beach resorts in the up in the Northeast that would only be maybe open for 3 months out of a year. Where they're at it hard for those 3 months, and then they probably got to fill in other times. I don't know, but sounds like your season is long enough that it's more than enough, and yet it's a full. You're ready for a rest when it's done, when Halloween comes.
We are, and we do during the 4 months that we're off. We do take.
We work a little.
Yeah, we take maybe 2 of those months completely off, but then the other 2 we're starting our plan. All of the planning for the upcoming season happens in our winter months when we're off. Any things we want to change, any marketing things we're doing. Because once your season starts, you don't have time to change the way you're doing things. You just got to hang on until you get through to the end of the season.
I know that gelato is similar. You've mentioned milk and sugar and and cream, so it's similar to ice cream in a way, but there's a difference too. What is the major difference?
That's probably the most popular question that we are asked, and the main thing is gelato is an Italian style of ice cream, and the ratio of milk and cream is different in gelato than in American ice cream. So it has less fat. It has more milk and less cream, where American ice cream has more cream and less milk. It also has less air, just the way that you make it. It has less air mixed into it. So it tastes more dense and thick, kind of like homemade ice cream that you used to make in the backyard in the churn, So it tastes different. It allows the flavors that you're using to because you don't have as much fat, it's not coating your tongue. You really taste those flavors in gelato.
It's a little more intense, I guess, because it's more concentrated.
Okay.
It's not as far as ice cream.
And that may be why we remember, just like you had that experience on vacation, going to the gelato store and saying, "Wow, this is really good," and it was special. It may be the same because I tend to I'm a fan of coffee ice cream, and most of the coffee ice cream that I find tastes watered down, and I want that. I want an intense flavor. I look for that, so that might be. I believe that the lovely lady Deborah that introduced us told me that you guys have several stores and that they're in smaller towns where you might be the only store of that kind in the town. Is that true?
Yes. So we have 5 stores in Kentucky. 3 are close to Lexington, which is the second largest city in Kentucky, and then 2 are on the outskirts of Louisville, and that's the largest city in Kentucky. But we are actually in small, more rural type communities. And we are on Main Street in the historic part of these downtowns in these small towns. As a matter of fact, the first store that we opened, we're in a town of about 9,000 people. Wow. It's a very small town. They have a Dairy Queen there, but when we opened, there was no other mom and pop kind of ice cream shop in town. And so in that one, we are in a very historic building down by the courthouse. And very picturesque little towns. And that's been a great model for us, even though when we first started, a lot of people didn't know what gelato was, you know? So,
It's not as common now. People seem to understand it.
yeah.
Right.
So, but that's been a great idea that we had.
It
We're
really
these small
has worked
towns.
for us. A lot of repeat
Okay.
customers.
Have you been able to capture that to some degree, that taking an evening walk, the walkability that you find in Europe, and where
Yeah.
people are just after
Yeah.
dinner, let's take a walk and we'll go get some gelato.
Square stores are pretty small, so a lot of people get it and walk around and eat it. So one store has a walk-up window, so they can walk up to the window and get it and walk around, sit outside.
Sit on the steps of the building next door, sit on the benches out front, that kind of thing. We also have
That's great
been-
marketing.
Well, yeah.
When people walk around with that, where'd you get that? That's right.
That's true.
That's true. And also, our stores are located close to restaurants. So our busiest time is after dinner. From 7:30 to 9 is our busiest time. And so people go to dinner and then they walk down the street and they come get gelato as their dessert. Works out great.
It's important to have a restaurant close to us. There's no doubt that's a big driver of business.
That also makes a lot of sense. I don't know that I thought of that.
It's a feeder.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you want, you might not like what they have on the menu at the restaurant, and oftentimes those are rather healthily priced. And it's usually something that they didn't make in-house.
So
Right?
what your experience of working together, what did you learn about each other through this process?
Well, we were together a long time, I guess, before. I don't know. Well,
Well,
Yeah,
I
but
think
working together is different.
It
you're
is.
right. Yes.
it is. I think maybe it kind of gives you a greater appreciation for your spouse. Things that he's managed to figure out and managed to pull off that I probably couldn't pull off. And things that are so different than your day-to-day job, your regular career was.
Right.
I think that's probably the most interesting thing.
Well, plus I think we've learned if we have a question or have to make a decision, I feel like we know each other enough. It's not like I've got to call her for every single thing, and she's the same way. I think we both make pretty good decisions without being taught. Rarely would we have a problem with what we decide.
Yeah.
So I think we've learned that, and we didn't have that at first. You got to have some independence, I guess, when you're both working in the same area. So that's something we'll learn.
Yeah.
So increased trust, as well as the appreciation for each other's strengths,
Right.
and
Yes.
that complementary nature of the strengths. That's really cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, what's something that would, I know I'm asking hard questions here. What's something that you would offer as advice to other families that are thinking about starting a business together?
You're probably going to work a lot more hours than you think, probably more than your regular job that you're doing. And it's very rewarding, I'll say that. And I think you're willing to work a lot harder when it's your business. And it's not as difficult, I don't think, to work a lot of hours when it's yours. Well,
I think that's a good point. But I also think that financially, I think maybe you need to realize that you're not going to make a fortune right at the beginning, no matter what you're doing. So you need to be financially able to carry yourself until the point that whatever business you're starting is able to support you, And I would say maybe that's longer than what you would imagine at first,
everything's more expensive, and you just got to know that.
You're not going to make a fortune in your first week, no matter what you're doing. And so you've got to be somewhat prepared for that, I think.
Yeah. So starting as a side hustle is a big advantage if you can do it.
Right.
That worked for us, and that it was perfect for our situation.
Yeah. And to not overextend yourself at don't spend more money than you can afford to lose starting off, because it may not go as well as you think.
It's a lot of problems with businesses I've been sometimes. They don't have as much money coming in, that a lot going on.
Yeah, they're so sure of what they're doing that can't possibly go wrong. What could go wrong? That they go all in, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
my goodness.
Shiny object syndrome.
Yeah.
True.
Did COVID, was it a big setback for your business model, or was it easy to adapt?
It was one of the toughest things I made ever did.
Yeah. Because we started opening stores in 2019.
I remember
And,
you said that.
Yeah. And we actually opened a third store in the fall of 2019 in Lexington, which is a larger city. And we did it right downtown in the event area, close to Rupp Arena and the Opera House, where they had lots of events and lots of concerts. And it was a very event-driven store, and it was quite successful. And then COVID hit. And those venues didn't have events for, just like any place else. The events stopped. And so we knew that we were going to have to make a decision pretty quickly about that store, because it wasn't a typical neighborhood kind of store where people it was not the destination. It was
Right.
People were coming down for events. And so we were fortunate enough that we were able to close that store, get out of that lease. But it was a tough decision for us,
Sure.
But we had two stores then, so we basically,
But
I worked one and she worked one, and we worked from open to close until
until we could bring
6 days a week until we could buy.
our staff back. Yeah.
So it was,
So closing that store in Lexington, it was definitely the right decision, because that could have killed us financially. It really could have. But at that time, we already had another location in the works and had planned to open in the summer of 2020 in another town. And we had to make the decision, do we go on and open it in the summer of 2020? Because we were not able to bring our staff back until the end of May in 2020. We had planned to open this new third store at the end of June in 2020. And we had to decide, do we go on and do this, or do we cancel these plans? What makes sense?
and the landlord was good too. He understood. He wanted us to come there, so he said, when you're interested, we'll do it. So he wasn't.
Wow.
Nobody was looking for any places to open anyway. So
Yeah, I was wondering. I didn't think there'd be a giant rush of people looking to start a new business in the middle.
He didn't have other crazy people beating down his door to open an ice cream shop in the middle of COVID. So we did a lot of soul searching,
Yeah.
and we decided that it was worth the risk, and we opened that store in June of 2020. And
Wow.
and
it's a good location.
it's a great location, and it still is a
It's a
great
good
store
store.
for us, So it was the right decision. So COVID, yes, it transformed what we were doing, but it was a prime example of having to decide kind of on the spur of the moment what is smart for your individual business. And that was the best decision for us, to close the event-driven store in Lexington, but to go ahead with this small town model that
we knew it was working for us everywhere else.
worked.
Yeah. I wonder if it was because you had the one that really had a different business model, if that made that decision a little clearer, because a lot of people kind of fall in love with their baby that they're building, and that store was, in a way, it was an outlier from the rest of your business model. So
It was different.
did that make it easier to make that decision?
It was easier because it was drastic. Their customers, there was nobody, so
Yeah.
we knew really quick that it was going to be a while, because it was still uncertain with COVID. What was going to happen, and we knew it was going to be a while before this started before it was done necessity. And really, to this day, I don't regret it one bit.
No, and I think if we
We
were
did the right
there
thing.
today, I don't know that events have even come back as much as they were.
Look how long that's been.
So
Right.
it would have been an awfully long haul trying to hang in there. So
Yeah.
it was definitely the right decision.
Yeah. And I think not guessing, knowing for sure what you want to do is important, because it's easy to hope and it never works out. You have to go ahead and make that decision and move on.
Right.
I learned that in the financial trading industry. Hope is not a strategy, and it's equally applicable to small business.
It's not. It's not. Wouldn't it be great though if it were? Things would be easier.
Would be.
You can't get emotional about it. So you just gotta make the right
Exactly. You got to look at the data, and you got to be somehow collecting the data to be able to look at the data. I think that's another place that small businesses, they get so involved in just producing and getting through the day that they forget to
work your staffing and your hours you're open. I mean, you've got to look at all of your numbers.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause if you don't, you don't know. You're just guessing.
And we, even to this day, we're looking at our numbers every week and we compare it to this week last year and this week 2 years ago. How are we doing? How are the sales? Are we getting our staffing right? Are we open the right hours? And what items are we selling? Do we need to be marketing a certain item more than what we're marketing it? So we're looking at that every week. We don't always get it right, but
Yeah,
We're-
but you're comparing week of this year to the same week of last year.
That's impressive.
That's refined.
Yeah.
Well, and
analysis.
the reason that we do that is because ice cream sales, it's a discretionary, it's an extra thing. Nobody has to come see us. It's not like we're a grocery store. And so there are cycles during the year that if there's a holiday during a week, our sales are down. If kids are going back to school, our sales are down because that discretionary income is being spent for school supplies. So that's why we compare it week to week, because that's where we see the differences. This is back to school this year, back to school last year. How are we comparing? Are we
Yeah.
doing just as well as we did last year, or did we do a little better?
It really helps. We have learned a lot on that. And we're usually right. Usually.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would think your judgment would get, as you learn, as you practice that more, that you'll get tighter and tighter on what you can reliably predict. Predict is a funny word, but
Yeah.
project maybe is a better word.
Well, and that's a
Suspect.
big part of the challenge that we have, because we've got to make sure we have enough product.
Right.
And so you're looking at your sales from this week last year to figure out how much product you're going to need if your sales are that this year. And then if you also add in the food trucks, which we have 8 mobile units also on top of the
Wow.
5 brick and mortar locations. So every week we have events. And so we're looking at those events. How much money are you going to make at each one of those events? And how many pans of gelato does that equate to? And how much does the kitchen have to produce to supply the events and the store sales that you're going to have for this week? So that's why those numbers become even more important. Because if you run out, then
Can't make any money.
you can't make any money,
You
right?
can't sell what you don't have, right?
Right. And if you make too much, then that cuts into the amount of money that you're making too. If it's things that you can't carry over to the next week and continue to sell next week. So
A lot of detail
There
there.
is so much, yeah. We didn't even talk about your training program. I know you probably got a pretty refined training program, but any like high points there? Like, is there something that you found? Because you're working with high school kids, so they're used to going to school. I'm just kind of spitballing here. They're already used to being in a learning environment and kind of taking stuff in really fast. How did you create your training program relative to that?
Our training program has gone through several different metamorphoses because I learn in a different way, even than Philip learns or that you would learn. And definitely a different way than a teenager learns sometimes. And even from staff member to staff member, they're learning in different ways. So our training really is 3 parts. We do instructional videos on how to make every single menu item and how to do every task that they're going to be expected to know how to do. We send them a link to this playlist. They watch all of those videos on the playlist, and then we schedule a time where we do an in-person training. And we in person make every one of those items and do every one of those tasks. And they get immediate feedback on, that's great, let's move on to the next thing, or try it this way, this would make it easier. And then the third part of the process is, we call them supervised shifts. And they actually work an opening shift and a closing shift with an experienced staff member kind of as a wingman. And that experienced staff member is not supposed to be hopping in and doing the things unless the trainee really needs their help, so the trainee is kind of getting their footing and they're learning. So they're learning independently, they're learning with their in-person trainer, and then they're learning with an experienced staff member. And so doing it 3 different ways, usually you're going to hit something there that resonates with them, something, and they're not going to remember it all, So you're still offering feedback each time you visit with them in the stores. And
Just like anybody, some pick it up, no problem. Some struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once if they can't get it, it's almost like they give up.
Yeah.
So weed
that
themselves out.
So you have to praise them on the things that they do well at. Because most have a certain area that they struggle with, And so you got to find the thing that they're good at and praise that.
Yes. Recognition is such a big thing. And it doesn't take a lot, In other words, it doesn't have to be a big win or a big show, but just recognition matters so much. Mm-hmm. So well done on that. That's awesome. How about your kids? So you mentioned you had grown kids. Have they shown interest in being involved in the business or now or in the future?
A couple of them have worked with us, but I don't think they're really interested.
They kind of have their own careers and are doing their own thing. And
They'll help from time to time.
yeah, if we're in a bind, they'll help. And we enjoy having them when they're with us. But I think my mother owned a small business. And as much as I would have loved to have had her small business, I think that she kind of thought that was her dream. She didn't want to saddle me with her thing unless I was really into it. And I think we kind of think that about our kids,
And if they were interested, I wouldn't fine. But they do their own thing. So.
And, if they don't have the same kind of passion, it would not go well. Because it's hard work. You got to love what you're doing.
You got to be dedicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah, so they get the opportunity to try it out, see if it's a fit, and if they fall in love with it, they fall in love with it. If they don't, then no harm, no foul. That's beautiful parenting right there.
Well, on that note, I think it's a great place to wind this up.
Thank you so much. So we're going to make sure we put in the show notes. I want to find out from you, offline where your stores are, what towns they're in, so we can make sure we put that in the show notes. And how people can find you is spottzgelato.com. I know that.
Yes, that'd be great. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. This has been wonderful.
Well, thank you
This is
for
fascinating.
We are certainly not experts.
We're
We
still
learn
learning.
something new every day.
Yes, we're still learning.
And that's a sign of an expert. That they're still willing to learn every day.
Yeah, it's the guy who thinks he knows it all that you got to watch out for.
Yeah.
He's lost his curiosity.
Right.
Right.
All righty. Well, thank you again so much, and we look forward to following the story of Spotz Gelato.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.